This week, Andy Syrewicze from Hornet Security is with us to discuss secure by default. How do we get there? In the security news, the USB Army knife that won't break the budget. I don't want to say EDR is useless, but there, I said it. Paul's list of excellent hacking tips, 4 to jump, an RCE that took a while to become public. Does malware care if it's on a hypervisor? MicroPython for fun and not for hacking. An unspecified vulnerability. Can you exploit speculative execution bugs, scanning the internet and creating a botnet by accident? All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. It's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly.
Quick question. Do your end users always, and I mean always, without exception, work on company-owned devices and IT-approved apps? I didn't think so. So my next question is, how do you keep your company's data safe when it's sitting on all those unmanaged apps and devices? 1Password has an answer to this question. Extended Access Management. 1Password Extended Access Management helps you secure every sign-in for every app on every device because it solves the problems traditional IAM and MDM can't touch. Check it out at securityweekly.com/1Password. Coming to you from Purgatory Studios in semi-high definition, compliments of Darth Vader himself, this is Paul's Security Weekly, episode number 848, being recorded on Wednesday, October 23rd, 2024. I am, of course, Paul Asadorian, joined remotely by Mr. Bill Swearingen. Bill, welcome.
Hey, Paul. Thanks for having me. Go Chiefs.
Mr. Josh Marpet is here with us. I don't have him. We lost Bill. I don't have him.
Bill dropped? Amazing. I don't know what happened there. Always a pleasure. I'm always here. I love it.
It's good to see you, man.
Good to see you too. What's going on?
Three of us haven't really chatted in a while. It's good. It's good to have you both here on the show. Where tonight we're talking about secure by default and trying to secure Microsoft Windows and cloud environments. We're excited to welcome Andy Syrewicze, the security evangelist from Hornet Security, to the show tonight. He is a 20-year IT pro specializing in Microsoft 365 cloud technologies. Security infrastructure by day. He's a security evangelist for Hornet Security, leading technical content by night. He shares his IT knowledge online over a cold beer. He holds the Microsoft MVP Award in security. Andy, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's good being here, and looking forward to talking with you guys today. Should be a good time.
And that's all for Windows security.
There it is.
Andy, how'd you get your start in information security?
You know, it's kind of an interesting story. It's a story of transitions, I guess I would say. So, I mean, I came from the sysadmin world, right? So I used to be an infrastructure guy, you know, SANs, NASs, networks, switches, fiber channel, virtualization, right? All that stuff. And, oh boy, I want to say 6 years ago now, made the pivot into security, right? Because I don't know what it was. Maybe getting sick of the 2 a.m. phone calls that, hey, the SAN's unreachable, come fix it now type of thing, you know? And it's like, time for a change. And kind of got into security from there. So that's how I ended up in security. And of course, my role as a technical security evangelist now, the title used to be technical evangelist when I was still infrastructure based, but kind of got into this technical marketing / content / pre-sales / kitchen sink role. When I exactly got sick of that 2 a.m. phone call that everything was broken, fix it now. And so now I get to talk about technology with fine folks like you guys. So
yeah, I hear you, man. I've held the evangelist title at 2 different companies now. And recently I was able to transition out of the evangelist role, but it is a kitchen sink kind of role. Cause like you do stuff in research, you do stuff for product, you do stuff for marketing. It's an interesting role. It's a lot of fun, but I transitioned to a little more of a research role, which I'm excited about, but nothing wrong with the evangelist role. Like I said, I've held it for quite some time.
Yeah, it's definitely, there are times where it's like, you know, I get asked a question. I'm like, wait, you want me to do what? I didn't know that was in my job description, So it's like
Everything's in your job
Yeah.
description.
I know, right? I know.
You have
right?
a
But
job description? God.
it's like so many security roles. I mean, it's something you won't get bored, right? And
Yeah, exactly.
that's the thing I like about it.
So Andy, do you focus on more of the 365? I struggle with the naming conventions. Maybe we should start there. But where's kind of your focus today? I guess I'll ask.
Yeah, so my focus is if I go way back, I do have some Linux administration knowledge under my hat from way back when. I don't know if anybody remembers the old Debian Woody and Debian Sarge days. So I'm dating myself a little bit there. But anyway, for like the last 15 years, I've been very Microsoft centric. So Windows Server, familiar with that whole stack, familiar with Microsoft Azure. But that all said, definitely my focus the last couple of years has been more in the 365 space. Not only because, business productivity kind of drives businesses to that direction, almost become a necessity for some organizations today. But that's where data is kind of shifting as well, right? I mean, you don't really see the days of on-premises file servers that much anymore. They're still out there for those organizations that still have that required on-premises component, right? But increasingly we're seeing, at least from where we sit in the industry, we see data living in SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business far more than it used to.
So I have a lot. I remember years ago we were talking about many businesses making that transition from on-premise Exchange and the whole environment over to the cloud, right? So largely from your perspective, you've been seeing a lot more people making that transition, hopefully successfully.
Yeah, it's been a trend for a long time now. I mean, it's kind of interesting. There's been a little bit of a resurgence I've seen in the last maybe 6 months. Stories of people moving back to on-premises. Typically, it's not on the 365 side, though. It's typically on the Azure or the AWS on the infrastructure side, because they get sticker shock after the first couple of months and wait, this is what we're going to be paying monthly, ad infinitum with this? No, we're moving back on premises. So I think there's some of that going on. But in the 365 world, me personally, and I think this is pretty general across administrators as a whole, nobody wants to manage Exchange on premise anymore.
No, I agree. So your email is Teams. So probably email and Teams, right, is probably the most popular components, right, and products that people are using in 365.
And then SharePoint for sure, right? So
what about, I'm just curious because I looked into like the Power Broker and the whole suite of tools that a lot of people may not even know about, like this whole suite of tools that exist in there for creating applications. Do you see a lot of adoption in that arena?
But yeah, in the Power Apps, the Power Automate world, there's definitely a huge adoption of that. At Hornet Security, we don't deal with that particular suite ourselves, but in my Microsoft MVP circles, I see a ton of adoption of Power Apps, and the Power App community is extremely vibrant today. I've not seen many communities as active as that community is. So it's nice to see.
One thing I noticed when I was, and it was a brief stint of working with that technology, given our topic, secure by default, from my perspective, right, Linux guy trying to go do, Microsoft 365 stuff, it was really locked down. Like I couldn't do anything without having to go ask someone to go. And I don't know if that was the environment that I was working in that was managed by an MSP, or if that's just, I believe in my reading, by default, a lot of that Power suite of tools
is locked
down
by default. Is that your experience too, Andy?
That's been my experience too. That said, I don't have deep experience in Power Apps, but from what I've seen, that's the case. And I have to look at it from Microsoft's perspective. I can't remember exactly what it was. It was a year or two back. There was some sort of security vulnerability. I'll think of it 10 minutes after we hang up on this call. But I remember they resolved it rather quickly. And so from their perspective, from Microsoft's perspective, they've got this service where they want, your average business users creating apps, right? And if there was ever a security vulnerability created as a result of a business user creating an app, that's a huge problem for them, right?
Right. And they really made it so it was internal to the company. Like it was super hard to make that exposed to the internet was my experience. It was definitely tailored to, you want to create an app, only authenticated users within your Microsoft environment can access it. There was the hoops you had to jump through to get any kind of external connectivity.
You know, it's interesting. I'm going to compare that because Copilot Studio, the new thing, is designed to make externally facing apps. They've really reversed that sort of mindset very quickly, I think. Sorry, Andy, go ahead.
No, you bring up a good point. I mean, there's a whole conversation to be had around security in the AI discussion, and don't get me started on Microsoft Recall, that whole mess. And so I can't speak too much to the security of Copilot Studio, but it's interesting to, like you said, you see that shift back towards the externally facing hosting. And I have to question if this is another one of those instances where innovation at all costs first and we'll secure it later, right? Mm-hmm. And again, it's early days for Copilot. I don't know that. This is just me. This is conjecture on my part, right?
He's right.
But I question it, right, when I see that. And their behavior with the whole recall debacle is indicative of that as well. But again, that's just my opinion.
No. If you don't mind me sort of expanding on that really quickly, I agree with you entirely. I have seen several companies where what I was told, and this is just third hand, was that Microsoft came in and said, you should do Copilot. And they said, okay, what's the prerequisites to it? They were told, well, you've got to have full lockdown on all of your access controls, full entitlement reviews, data classification's got to be done for purview and things like that. And like, well, we haven't done any of that. Okay, let's roll it out anyway. And that's not cool. But, speaking of that, I'd love to direct you in your 365-ness towards purview for a second.
Sure.
And I'm honestly curious what you're thinking. I've gotten asked, I can't tell you how many times, how good purview is against Varonis.
What is purview?
So purview is, how do I want to explain it? So purview is the compliance and governance suite inside of the Microsoft Cloud. So it contains features like encryption management, which surprises a lot of people. The encryption management component of 365 got sucked up into purview. The DLP, the data loss protection stuff is inside of purview. Some of the e-discovery stuff as well has been pulled into purview, if I remember correctly. And of course, this is one of the ongoing struggles with the Microsoft Cloud, right? Is like you've got features that are moving between product suites, and it's really difficult to keep track of. That said, Purview as a product, it's a good product. It is very functional. It does well. What I've found, and this is my 23 years of experience working with Microsoft, is when they develop a product or a tool, it's usually with the mega enterprises of the world in mind, right? So they're planning on very siloed IT teams. You have a Purview person or a Purview team.
Yeah.
And it requires that level of manpower to use it effectively.
Investment. It requires that level of investment to use it properly. And small to medium business is like,
That's a great segue, though, because I want to talk about what do they call it? Microsoft 365? Is that the appropriate term for it? So if you just do it, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, it used to be called Office 365, which the Office brand is officially dead now. Even though there's still some Office license names still out there, but it's Microsoft 365 now. Sorry, continue.
So you're an organization, you've got Exchange, or maybe you're a newer organization and you want a cloud solution to host your email and calendar, right? You're basically, your options are either Google or 365. And you're going 365. And that's your decision. And now you have a brand new account, brand new migration. If you're, on premise, what does the default configuration look like? This could be a pretty lengthy discussion, right? Like, I feel like by default, you hit the nail on the head that Microsoft assumes that you've got an entire team dedicated to email and calendar. And when you adopt this 365 cloud technology, that team is going to go ahead and customize it for your environment. But not everyone has that team. And I feel like a lot of stuff is not secure by default when you're making this either new decision or transition into 365.
Correct. And it's definitely a struggle for the SMB space because either you have, on the really small side, you have Bob from accounting is the pseudo IT guy of the organization, right?
Right.
Or when you get up into the middle-sized businesses, I'm thinking like 500 to 1,000 users, you've typically got a very time-strapped one man or one woman admin team or a couple, and they just don't have time to do it properly, right? So those are the areas where you see a lot of struggles here. And
Yeah,
I feel
like I just want to say, I feel like below 500, you do have one person, but that one person also has to do customer stuff to
right
validate to make their salary like justifiable, right?
Yep, definitely. And I have to give Microsoft a little credit here because the defaults today are a little bit better than they used to be.
Sure.
I don't remember exactly when they made this change. See, it changes so frequently that it all blends together, right? But I want to say it was a year or two ago, they introduced what they call security defaults. So if I go out today and I spin up a new M365 tenant, security defaults is enabled right out of the gate. So I get things like MFA is, everybody will be prompted to enroll in MFA, right? There's some conditional access stuff that gets enabled. But that said, there are still some things that are generally insecure. I feel like SharePoint is kind of the bastard stepchild when it comes to security in the 365 space. And there's a lot of reasons for that, right? If you think about SharePoint's evolution, it started as an on-premises product, like so many of the products in the 365 suite, right?
I actually forgot about that,
and so its entire security profile is still kind of in that on-premises mentality. And even some of the on-premises UIs for permissions management are still present in SharePoint Online. And so you end up in a situation where your average user, heck, even your average system admin doesn't know how to properly secure SharePoint. And out of the gate, you can share externally. Most people in the organization can just share externally right out of SharePoint.
Right.
And there's no governance out of the gate. There's no visibility. I can't, as an administrator, go into some UI and say, hey, I want to see everything that's shared externally. Now, I could write a PowerShell script that calls the Graph API that gives me that information, but I have to have that skill first, right? And so for your average system admin that maybe just dabbles in PowerShell, that can be a bit of a hurdle to get over. So that's just one example.
There's probably some GitHub projects you could find of people that have written scripts to do
that.
But again, to your point, it still requires some level of skill and knowledge to be able to even use someone else's tool or script that's doing that for sure.
So you're telling me you want your system admin to go find some random GitHub project,
I know, that's the
log in as domain admin, and then run that. Yeah,
that's how I help people with their Microsoft environments. I'm like, look, you need to give me admin because I found this random GitHub repo that has this tool, and it's going to give me all the information about your M365.
I'm sure it's
instance,
fine. I'm sure
and
it's
going to be totally fine. I forget
Nothing
the one I
bad's
used.
going to happen today.
I used one that was like called Hawk or Falcon or something like that did exactly that. Because I was like,
I think that's released by CISA though, right? So there was one released by CISA, and then I think the other one was maybe a CrowdStrike, maybe it was Falcon.
There was another company that was like a Windows company, like MDSec or something like that.
Yeah, you're right. It was MDSec.
That maintains a tool for that. Yeah.
You're right.
But I'm like a Microsoft 365 noob. What is the real difference between SharePoint and OneDrive? That's
a funny question, and that's a question that comes up often. So I guess let me explain it this way, and it will hopefully become clear. So if you go and look at OneDrive and you look at any of the links that are associated with it, OneDrive for Business is actually just SharePoint under the hood. It's just SharePoint.
Interesting. Gotcha.
Yep. And to add to the interestingness of it, if I go out to Microsoft Teams and I create a team or, Paul, you and I have a chat going, I send you a file via Teams, all of the storage that underpins Microsoft Teams is just SharePoint as well. Same
thing. Just SharePoint. It's not OneDrive, it's SharePoint. Yeah.
And for every Teams group and channel and direct message that you send, there's a SharePoint folder created that many people don't, and many admins don't realize is there, and they don't handle them properly.
But which can be awesome if they do, right? Like, I mean, it can be a game changer if you really know how to use Teams that way, right? But
if you admin it properly, it's a huge game. Like, it's monstrous. If you admin it improperly, it's hilariously bad.
For sure.
But I feel like the permissions in SharePoint for me are just wonky.
They are.
Like very, very wonky. Like it creates multiple layers that just seem unnecessary to me.
And that is a huge, huge problem. And it's funny, you know, I'm not going to shill one of our products, but I just want to point out that this problem, this permissions management story, we struggled with it so much internally that we went out and built a product to address that problem.
Yeah, but Andy, that's great. I mean, that's how like the greatest software is created, right? Especially open source. Like, I have a problem. It's a problem for me, so I'm going to create a tool, and probably other people have this problem too. And you might open source it, or you might make it a commercial product, and that's totally fine. Like everyone, we have to feed ourselves and our families too. Like that's fine, right?
Open source.
Yeah, well, like, you know, but it's the classic story of open source, right? Like I had a problem, I created a tool for myself, and I'm gonna share it with the world. But also, I'm not knocking the commercial aspect of this because, again, like we have to eat and feed our families.
Yep, definitely. And we struggle with this problem so much internally that we're like, okay, we're gonna go make something. And so we had a couple of different issues with this. One is the visibility aspect of it. You know, we talk about all those different SharePoint sites that get created via Teams. Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's no visibility of it natively. There are some cases where, like I said, I have to go make a graph call in order to get all that information, and
to see like who has what permissions to the shares that are created, whether they're created by a user, whether they're created automatically by Teams, or whatever the case may be.
Correct. Right? And just like a traditional file system, it's hierarchical, right? So a user could go halfway down the folder tree and customize permissions there. And SharePoint natively doesn't provide a good mechanism or good visibility for me to find out if that's happened. And so that was the first challenge we set out to solve with our permission manager product was the visibility.
This is a challenge that many of us have, and I will use this as an example. You know, we were acquired by Security Weekly was acquired by CRA. Security Weekly was a Google shop for email and Google Drive, and we transitioned into the Microsoft 365 environment. And a lot of us from the Security Weekly team were just like overwhelmed and very confused because it was a different world transitioning from Google Drive into SharePoint and OneDrive. So this is the experience that, so when I ask these questions and these use cases, this is the experience I'm drawing from.
Yep, and I think this is a common theme, not just with SharePoint and OneDrive and the storage in Teams. It's a common theme across 365 in general because which one do I want to pick on here? Let's talk about task tracking and task management in 365. You have Microsoft Planner, which is a Kanban type solution. You have
it just sucks.
Wasn't Planner? Where did Planner come from? Was Planner a local app? I want to say it came from the
Planner was born out of an unholy union between some ungodly reject of Microsoft Project and some open source piece of crap that somebody whacked together in 10 minutes.
Hold on, is Microsoft Project still a product and Planner?
It's still around.
Okay,
it's still around.
Still a product, and it's still better than Planner by far, and it's actually a decent product. But it doesn't come with 365. Planner comes with 365.
And then you have Microsoft Task. I think it's called Tasks. I never use it. Tasks.
Loops or tasks? Loop or tasks?
Or no, wait. It's Microsoft To Do. Microsoft To Do.
Yeah.
And it's just a basic to-do list. And then, to your point, we also have Microsoft Loop, which is like a Notion type of application, right? And so if I'm an end user, a standard business user, and I have, like a task management need, which one do I go use?
Right.
So you have that issue from a spreadsheet, yes, right? So you have that issue from the end user perspective, but then from a security point of view, as the administrator, now I have to know which tools in my organization are my users actually using? So I need that information so I know what I need to do to secure, my
That's what was going through my
right?
head exactly, Andy, is given all of these options in different situations, then users using different tools, then how do I develop a security strategy to help everyone secure all of this stuff?
Yep. It's a problem. It's difficult. And it takes a lot of, I say this in a lot of conversation I have, it takes a lot of operational maturity to do it properly. A lot of discipline, to go out, do the inventory, make the plan, and then enforce it. That's always the difficult part, is the enforcement, right?
Bill, I want to call on you because I know you do incident response. Are you finding that a lot of the incident response you're doing are, when you kind of lift the covers, is it folks struggling with these issues that we're discussing right now?
Not really. I will say that, and probably I'd say maybe 80% of the cases that I've done just this year, Office 365 was a component, right? So that Office 365 either was the target or part of the actions on objectives, right, that they were going after. And certainly what I find, and Andy, I'm sure that you sympathize with this, is that what we find is especially when you go and you start looking at what the roles that are available to administrators, there's something like, and I'm just guessing here, 300 different roles that you can give an administrator. So what we find is people just say, just give them everything, do everything, right? So we've all been there probably with GitHub, and like I
ran into that with Google buckets, Google Cloud buckets are the same thing.
Right.
It's just, I was like, I can't figure out. Well, just make Paul the super admin, and then I can do what I need in the bucket.
Yeah. So what we find a lot of times is just over-privileged users. Obviously, I saw the notes, and I'm sure that we'll get there. But they target installing OAuth applications right from the get-go, and and just always have access to come back into that tenant, even if you think they're gone. Those kind of things. So,
interesting.
Go ahead, Andy.
I was going to say, I think the OAuth, I wanted to bring up the OAuth angle as part of this conversation, because we see that as one of the primary persistence mechanisms in 365 environments, because a lot of admins don't know that when I authorize an OAuth application, and in case you don't know what an OAuth application is, think of those authentication pop-ups you get that say, hey, you're installing application ABC, it wants this type of access into your environment, and you have to authorize it, right? When you do that, you are creating a service principal inside of Microsoft Entra, formerly known as Azure AD. You are creating a service principal, and that service principal is now its own object with those rights. So it doesn't matter if, let's say, a threat actor compromises a user account in 365. They go install an OAuth application that they want to use to establish persistence in the environment. It doesn't matter if that end user changes their password. The attacker can lose access to that account. They still have that persistent access through that OAuth application that they installed inside of the environment. And surprise,
a stupid analogy is like you have those digital locks, even if they're not internet or Bluetooth enabled, but you can create different codes for different people, right? That's essentially OAuth. Like I basically created a code for some user or for some service, and they can use that code to get into and access whatever they need to. Yeah.
Yep. Correct. And it's funny. I don't know if you guys remember the Midnight Blizzard incident with Microsoft. There are the two big ones from this year and last year.
Midnight Blizzard was Microsoft was breached, basically.
Correct. Yep. So the two big ones were Storm 0558, which is a Chinese nation-state threat actor, and then you had Midnight Blizzard, which was a Russian nation-state threat actor, right? And so the Midnight Blizzard incident was a case where Microsoft corporate emails were exfiltrated as part of that, amongst other things. And why I bring that up is a malicious OAuth application was a component of the attack chain on that one. So they got owned by their own OAuth issues, right? So it's relevant and popular attack method for sure.
Andy, are there tools we talked about? Auditing permissions of your SharePoint and OneDrive and et cetera. But are there tools to audit your OAuth permissions? I mean, Google has this problem too, right? It's not just specific to Microsoft.
Yeah, so Microsoft, they do have solutions in their security suite that do this. At Hornet Security, we don't have a solution for this, but you'd be looking at something like a cloud access security broker, often called a CASB, is kind of the industry acronym for it, to kind of keep an eye on those applications. Because otherwise, if you don't have something like that, as the administrator, I have to log into Entra and I have to go look at OAuth applications, and then I have to look at, I forget exactly what the verbiage is, like permitted applications or something like that. And I have to audit that whole list myself and like, okay, that one looks
Bill's
good.
nodding
That one
his
looks
head
good.
like he
I know,
does this on a regular basis.
I know, and then you get this nasty object ID. Like I don't know,
Yep.
like I don't know.
Yep.
I don't know. Was the person in HR supposed to be installing object ID? Blah 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 blah.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's difficult. But there are some scripts out there. So like I mentioned, CISA. So the government
CISA.
agents.
It's called CISA.
I call it CISA.
CISA.
I'm in Kansas City.
Potato,
CISA.
That doesn't
potato.
absolve you of calling it the right name, Bill.
I call it CISA too, just FYI.
Andy's our guest, so
Sorry.
he gets a little more leniency. Bill's got his Chiefs hat on, so he gets no leniency on the show.
Well, so there are several. They've actually been crushing it lately. They've released several PowerShell scripts that will help do a lot of exactly what you're doing. It'll go through and
you
it'll
referenced that earlier. Okay, yeah.
It'll dump out some of those permissions. Now it's not, Andy. It's not doing anything like what you're doing. I mean, it's truly still is like an incident response tool rather than like a some like a commercial product. Something that you would use, but. I got to tell you, it's not easy. It's not easy, and there's a lot of places that you can hide in Office 365 for persistence, right? So
For sure.
like,
It's interesting though. We talk about secure by default, but to run a business today, you have to use things like OAuth and enable applications. I mean, even just like a user using Google, I do a lot of OAuth stuff just to make my life easier, and there's a security benefit to that. It cuts down. Well, it cuts down to the number of like credentials that I have to remember, right? If I just say I'm going to log in with my Google account for certain things, I don't do it for everything, but for certain things, I'm like, yeah, okay, use my Google account for that. And I lock down my Google account with like multi-factor, and then Google has a great system for like telling me that someone's trying to log in as me, so I will use that facility. But in an enterprise setting, I have to be able to audit that, which is very different from being secure by default. So we almost need like a maybe a monitoring by default, or like detection by default. We need to make it easy for folks to do this, right?
Yeah, this brings up a number of different things for me. So one, I think as an industry, and we can talk about cloud software specifically, there is such a pressing need for innovation that I think security becomes an afterthought. That's one issue. And where else that leads me is, I'm sure you guys probably saw this, is Jen Easterly talking about how we don't have a security problem. We have a software quality problem, right? And so my particular opinion on this, I totally agree with her. I'm happy that she said that. And it makes me think about, what do we really reward in the technology space, right? Exactly, fast, the news agencies, the Gartners of the world, the Forresters of the world. We reward quick, innovative, flashy, sexy features. We're kind of rewarding the wrong thing, right? Shouldn't we be rewarding secure, stability, reliability,
boring,
hasn't been breached in X amount of time?
But
right?
safety comes to mind, right? Shouldn't we be rewarding safety?
Yes, that's my opinion, right? But
you drive a Tesla, Paul. Like you can't. Like,
safety is out the window, dude. In the test, out the window. Man, the auto summon feature is there is no such thing as safety. And I mean, they try, but good Lord.
And the other thing I wanted to make sure I circle back to, based on what you said, talking about kind of monitoring by default, I mentioned Storm 0558 earlier. That was an incident where Chinese nation state threat actors, Microsoft never came out and said explicitly how they did this, but they were actually able to procure a consumer signing key from Microsoft that allowed them to forge their own authentication tokens for Microsoft Entra. Now, the only way that this was caught was because I think it was the State Department. They were paying for the advanced logging capabilities inside
I
of the
remember this
Microsoft
whole
Cloud.
story now. Yes, that you say that,
Yep.
Andy. Yep.
And so that brought up this whole conversation in the security space about like, okay, should that level of logging just be included? Should we be gatekeeping that level of logging, that visibility? So it's like this big ethical question. I mean, to me personally,
But Andy,
if I had my
Microsoft
choice,
they backed off on that, and they removed the pay for feature for that. Correct?
I think it was. I'd have to go back and double check, but I think it was for a period of time they were going to make it free. I think for a year or something like that. But I mean, to me, if I understand that there's a cost for Microsoft to store and process those logs, right? Especially at the scale that they're doing it. Me as the user, I would rather you just bake that into your cost, and I just get that
and give it to
by
everyone.
default.
Yeah.
Yep.
Increase everyone by 10%, and it comes with everyone's. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I hate it when those, like security features are an add-on, right? So like there's been a few products and where I have paid to be the premium just so I could use MFA, right? Like, come on, like that is insanity to me, right?
So wait. You're saying the security should be built into software?
Yes.
And the secure code should be what we turn out.
And they should be celebrated for the fact.
And the developer houses. And so that we should turn out secure code, include the security features like MFA and OAuth or OAuth, depending on if you're Bill. That we should have things that shouldn't have things on the KEV, the known exploitable vulnerabilities from the CISA. Okay.
CISA.
Whatever. And this software should maybe have a bill of materials and follow standards and frameworks. But who would pay for that?
Yeah, see, the problem is, I kind of want to bring that back, when you were talking about what do we celebrate, and we, celebrate fast. Like the problem is like, I certainly agree with all of you that it's not sexy and it's not cool, right? Like, and it'll
Unlike
never.
Bill.
That's true. Both of those.
Minus the hat.
Right. But that'll never be celebrated. Nobody wants to win the award for, the most reliable person for the last 10 years running. Like, cool, I guess. Like, I guess I showed up to work every day. You know what I mean? Like,
I don't know. There's something to be said for that, but there's also something to be said for that friend where you go out and have a wild time every time you're with that friend.
That's right. But
I have to say, Bill is one of my friends that would fall in that camp. 100%.
Well, so like when I think about and I make fun of your Tesla all the time, but when I think about I
make fun of your football team all the time.
The future 5 years, right? So when we really truly actually have full self-driving, not just the marketing around it, like, is there going to be a difference for what you get if you were to buy the Bentley or the Mercedes versus the
Volvo? The Volvo is, I mean, I don't know if they did it on purpose, but marketed on safety, right?
Yeah, but I mean, like, if you pay higher end, like, are you getting better safety with those features, right? Or should there be standards, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, should all self-driving cars be the same, right? Like
the same level of safety. There should be a standard that they have to meet for the same level of safety.
Right. Like, but is that how it's going to be?
And then leave the rest to the market. Like, again, the Volvo example, well, we're going to go above and beyond the safety standards, and that's what we're going to market on, right?
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I mean, like, it's an interesting, because when people become, when people like their health, their safety, like physical safety, that's when we see a lot of standards. We see a lot of rules. We see a lot of those kind of things. Josh, I would assume you know, but it seems like with software, we kind of just, it's there's no hope, right? Like, just put out some features. Let's go. I don't know.
It is typical for startups to not think about compliance, not think about standards, not think about security, not think about, look, I have a story.
Startups want to get to MVP, man, right? That's their goal.
No,
in the beginning.
no. It's much, well, they want to get to MVP. You're absolutely right. I apologize. But I have a famous story. I did a continuing legal education for the Philadelphia Bar Association about HIPAA. And, I put a panel together of InfoSec people and we did a really cool, the lawyers had a great time. They were like, okay, this is it. Can I ask about this and this? They asked some great questions, except for the one guy that was like, well, I'm not subject to that. We're like, do you do personal injury? Yes, you are. Shut up. But anyway, this one guy comes up and he goes, hey, I'm a lawyer for a small company. Can I put them on the phone with you? I'm like, okay. So they call like a day or two later and they're like, hey, we just got a really quick question for you. I'm like, yeah, whatever, fine. And they said, look, so we do ephemeral medical messaging. Okay. This is like Signal, messages that go away, ephemeral.
They call it at least my wife calls it secure chat in the healthcare.
Secure medical chat.
Yeah. Well, she calls it just secure chat. She's like, I secure chat with the doctor.
I didn't know that they were doing it securely, but they did know that it was ephemeral. So it was ephemeral medical messaging.
But I don't know that they know if it's ephemeral or what the security is behind it. But when they're discussing patient care and patient data, it's done over what they just, at least here in the Northeast or Rhode Island, they call it secure chat.
You would love this one, actually. I forgot your wife's in healthcare.
Yeah.
But no, so they go, okay, so we do ephemeral medical messaging. I'm like, okay. They go, do we have to follow HIPAA?
Well, yeah. If you're including patient data, yeah.
Do you have medical data that goes back and forth between doctor and patient and doctor and so? Oh yeah, that's
what else
designed.
Would be going back and forth between?
I don't know.
Them, right?
Appointments.
Yeah.
Appointments. What the hell do I know?
It could be. Yeah, it could be. But appointments
and so
are
I
different.
said, well, if you're doing medical data between a covered entity, a doctor, and a patient, the HIPAA applies. Period.
But even like anyone involved, not just a doctor, any healthcare professional.
I said
involved
covered entity.
In patient care.
So that's covered entity covers all of that.
Yep.
And they said, really? Yeah, really. But nobody told us that. We didn't have to get a license or anything. Okay, let's sit down and talk about this for a while. And it was like people don't know these things.
Yeah, but at least they asked, right? And they do now, right? So
they only asked because their lawyer made them ask.
Well, it doesn't matter how it happened, So, but I'm curious around the ephemeral chat. So Paul, is it something that they can set like in Signal, or is it?
It's not. I'm not sure what it is. I haven't really dug into it, and I know Bill, you're a huge fan of disappearing messages in Signal.
That's true. That's true.
For different reasons.
Yeah,
different reasons.
Same reason.
I did want to transition, Andy.
Hey.
There was a couple.
Pics are indeed medical, because it could.
Right.
Sorry, Andy.
No, Andy. I wanted to transition. We had a couple of notes about legacy architecture and legacy systems, and we've had a lot of discussions over the 19-year history on legacy systems. And a lot of that stems from my experience in university, Larry's experience in healthcare, to tie it back to our previous discussion, right? But legacy stuff, systems, software plays heavily into the Microsoft ecosystem. How are people dealing with legacy issues such as legacy authentication, legacy operating systems when they're looking to transition their organizations to Microsoft 365, for example?
Yeah, that's a good point. So, I mean, there's a couple of different issues there. Well, to your point, you certainly have the concerns when transitioning from, maybe a legacy on-premise version of Exchange. I think it was last year was a terrible year for Exchange security. I think there were 10 CVEs last year for Exchange that were CVSS 7 or above, if I remember correctly. I mean, it was a bad year for Exchange. And there's never been a verification of this, but there's very much this sense that Microsoft is whole hog on 365 on Exchange Online, that Exchange just doesn't give the love and attention that it once did, right? So some are questioning whether that's intentional or not. I don't know, but it's a question that's out there, right?
Well, certainly, it's Microsoft. It's in Microsoft's best interest, and I don't know if this is nefarious or not, but they want to transition everyone from Exchange on-premise to online. And again, I don't know if that's necessarily like a bad. I don't think that's Microsoft being evil. I mean, we could certainly maybe provide evidence that there might be some kind of nefarious reasons why, business-wise, for Microsoft. But I think
there's very few business reasons to have an on-prem Exchange server. Right?
I agree. I think it just helps everyone if you're transition. Is it better for everyone, Microsoft and all their customers, to transition to Microsoft 365 for email and calendar? Right? There's just a lot of reasons why it's better for everyone.
Yep. When you say legacy systems, the other thing I think of, especially when it comes to 365, is I guess I would kind of label it as the 365 lifecycle. So, you have your legacy authentication mechanisms inside of 365, right? The older stuff. And if I go and spin up a new M365 tenant today, legacy authentication is going to be disabled by default. That's one of the security defaults. But if I have a tenant that's been around for any length of time, I, as a very busy admin, it's very possible I missed the notifications that, hey, you should disable legacy authentication. I very rarely, and there's a reason for this, but very rarely has Microsoft ever gone and made a proactive change on their end to everybody's 365 tenant, right? There's a lot of reasons why they wouldn't want to do that. But if I'm an admin and I'm not paying attention, and I have a legacy 365 environment that's been around for years and years and years, I have to make the conscious choice to actually go in, make sure that I'm not using those old legacy, easily breakable authentication mechanisms anymore, and then make that change, right?
And is that to support legacy operating systems?
Yeah, that's part of it, and legacy mail clients and things like that, right? Yep.
Which it happens too, right? Like in smaller environments, fine, but when you're 50,000 users plus, that's certainly an issue.
It is, for sure. For sure. It becomes difficult to handle that very quickly, for sure. And so that's just one example, right? I think the other example is I have seen cases where, and I hate to bring it back to SharePoint, but I've seen cases where people have tried to migrate from on-premises SharePoint to SharePoint Online, and that usually brings a whole heap of permissions issues along with it, right? And kind of like the administrative role discussion we were having earlier, sometimes the admin just gets fed up and says, you know what, everybody has access to all the things, right? And they never go back and right size that after the fact. So I guess that's not necessarily a legacy technology struggle of 365 specifically. That's more of a migration thing, right? But it happens regularly. In terms of, on-premises stuff, Paul, I think I brought up this story when you and I were kind of talking about this episode a few weeks back, in that I still run into those situations with some customers where they have that one system that sits in the corner and it does this one super important thing that two people in the organization use. The example I'm thinking of is in my early days as a system admin, I was working at a manufacturing facility, and in their quality lab, there was this very specific machine that tested a specific part. This thing ran not MS-DOS, PC-DOS version 3.
Hell yeah.
Wait, what?
Yeah, we have to struggle to remember the last time we touched PC-DOS as old people.
Yep. And so it was going to be, I don't know, like $750,000 to upgrade this machine. And
that's
so
kind of secure by design, though, right? Like,
that's what Andy and I were saying, right? Like,
there's no TCP stack even.
I was going to say, I don't think a TCP IP stack is even there.
Right.
Southwest Airlines has entered the chat.
Well, I think, but I think you're right. I think there's some like internet tropes that point to Southwest. But I think transportation in general, we've covered stories about train companies that are running really old versions of DOS and OS2 Warp. Like, remember OS2 and OS2 Warp? So it's still out there today in certain sectors. I think, Andy, you're right. Manufacturing, Josh, to your point, transportation still has these highly legacy. But like at that point, again, to your point, Bill, like, does it even have a TCP/IP stack
Right.
on the system?
There's not even no USB port, not even a CD-ROM, right? So like,
Yeah,
I don't
floppy.
even,
it was floppy disk back then.
That's right.
For sure.
And I think there's another example I think of that same company actually. They had been making a lot of acquisitions at the time, and they acquired an old company, and there was this old legacy domain. These old, not even Windows Server 2000. These were Windows NT domain controllers, and those things sat there for years because, and this is a common issue I'm sure you guys run into, people are afraid to touch them. Like,
Yes.
the guy that set those up and supported them retired 10
they were
years
four
ago.
people ago, right? Four people ago, right?
Exactly.
4. God, you're optimistic.
Yeah, right.
And so it takes a very concerted effort by the admin to, one, figure out what the hell this thing does. 2, what am I going to break by messing with it? And 3, actually dealing with it and bringing it up to snuff in terms of security, right?
But also the cost of upgrading it is
Yep.
just astonishing. I think, Andy, you give the example where it's $250,000 to go purchase a new system. Like, no wonder people are running legacy operating systems. If there's that much of a cost to the business, they're going to be like, well, like, what's the real risk here? Like, is it going to cost us more than $250,000 to deal with a security incident, or can we just keep running this thing? Which is, it's not a great place to be all around, right?
I was going to say, I've seen several situations, especially in my managed service provider days, where I came across this very situation where it was cost prohibitive to upgrade some sort of legacy system. And so the customer wouldn't want to properly secure it. So it then turned into a situation of like, okay, now we're going to mitigate the risk. We're going to carefully control the network access to this particular machine. Yep. Segment the heck out of it. And I can't count the number of times we ran across that type of thing.
So speaking of segment, I like as at Hornet Security, I know that you guys specialize in Office 365. So as somebody who does like incident response, I'm really curious about what attacks are you seeing, like with your customers? What attacks? What's common? Like what what kind of attacks? What kind of problems? We kind of touched on that topic, but I'd really like to throw it back to you because I'm interested to hear what you see.
Andy, I was going to throw in forwarding rules and email scams. I don't know if that's tops on your list or not.
That's a big one. Yep. So, I mean, that's not necessarily like a security scanning thing, but we actually released a new product just a couple weeks ago called Multi-Tenant Manager. It's designed for MSPs, but it allows you to, fleet-wide, if I'm managing, 20 customers, M365 tenants, I can go and configure that do not allow external forwards rule across the entire customer base. Whereas before, I would have had to log into each tenant manually as the global admin and make that change, right? So that is one consideration. In terms of the types of attacks that we're seeing, we do email security as well. So, of course, we're seeing all the typical stuff there, the spear phishing, the C-suite fraud, all that type of stuff. I think the one that has caught my eye the most lately is your reverse proxy toolkit. So all geared towards token theft, right? And so you've got your EvilGenix. I don't want to bash EvilGenix. It's a legit, red teaming tool. But just like any penetration, any penetration testing utility can be used for ill purposes, right?
Sure.
The other big one that we see is the well phishing kit, and we also see Pi Fisher as well. So whereas EvilGenix is more, I kind of joke about this when I'm talking about it. EvilGenix is more of like your CapEx model of spear phishing, right, and credential theft, and that I have to host it myself, whereas Pi Fisher is my OpEx model, right? I go pay and buy it as a service. And so, if there's any of your listeners that are unfamiliar with this attack method, this is one of those cases where I'm going to use this service. I'm going to attach it to a domain that I own, and I'm going to create, a very cleverly crafted landing page. So I've actually demoed this in webinars, and I, of course, went the 365 route. And so I tricked my target into navigating to a URL that I want them to go to. They land on what appears to be a 365 login screen, and I capture their credentials. And the really nefarious thing about this is it also works through the MFA process as well. And so the user's prompted for MFA. Entra spits out the token, and I capture the token, I inject it into my browser, I hit refresh, and I'm now logged in as the user, right? And so we are seeing a lot of that right now.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And it's just, and what sucks about it is it is so well done. It's hard to, there's like, what training do I need to give to that user, right? There's little things here and there, but it's just so they had MFA, right? They got a real pop-up from Microsoft, right? Like all of those things, right? It's very difficult to address.
And we also do a security awareness product as part of our suite as well too. So we are doing some training on that. But whenever I'm talking about this, we can train the user to look at URLs all the time. It's not that difficult to come up with a convincing URL. And the last time I demoed this, as I was explaining the demo before I did it, I was talking about URLs, and my wife really likes Nike shoes. She gets a bunch of shoes from Nike. So I use Nike as my example. And just, for kicks and giggles, I went out and I'm like, okay, what convincing domain can I find that I could use for this? Nike-365.com at that time was available. If I'm an average end user working for Nike, would I question that? I know I work for Nike. I know we use M365. That looks legit to me, right? And so I think that's a real problem that we have as an industry. And then to build on that, another variation of this that we've been seeing in terms of malicious link delivery, we've been seeing a lot of phishing attempts via email, and especially attached to Microsoft brand impersonation emails. Because if you think back to the MFA process, enrolling for MFA, there's a QR code involved in that process. So users are used to seeing QR codes associated with Microsoft emails, right? And so they'll use that to not only siphon some credentials and tokens out of the user, but we also see cases now where maybe the attacker wants to target the mobile device, and they use the QR code to do that. Like, hey, here's your email. Take your phone and scan the QR code. And of course, now the attacker has moved that attack to the user's mobile device that may not have the EDRs, the XDRs, all the security bells and whistles that their endpoint does, right?
Awesome stuff, Andy. We're running short on time, but I want to make sure that I ask you 5 questions. Are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
Oh boy, here we go. Let's do it.
3 words to describe yourself.
Funny, dependable, loyal.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
That's a tough one. Boredom. There we go.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
Boy, that's a tough one. What would the title be if I wrote a book about myself? Interesting ?
What is your favorite hacker movie?
Oh, I gotta go with Hackers. Sorry. Yeah, it's a classic.
Yes, we love it. Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents, alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
Oh, I was going to do it. I knew Larry wasn't here, and I was going to jump in.
Andy, choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, real, or fictional. I don't know. I was so close. Yeah.
2 celebrities, live, dead, real or fictional. Ooh, that's a tough one because there's so many good options or interesting options, I would say. Oh boy, that's a tough one.
Why do you think about it, Andy? I know it's a hard question. I don't know. I've asked this question of many guests, and mine just come to my head. But again, I've had a lot of time to prep. Robert Downey Jr. and Betty White would be my fictitious parents.
Just because he likes thinking about it.
That's right. I don't know. That's just what it comes down to.
Well, I guess I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan. That's always my
Nice.
my big my big geeky nerdy thing. I'm gonna go with
Yes, the precious. The precious.
no, not Gollum, not Gollum. I'm gonna go with Elrond. Hugo Weaving played Elrond, right? And we'll go Galadriel as, there we go. That would be interesting, at least. They would have lots of interesting stories to tell, being they're immortal and all, right? So there we go. I'm going to go with that.
Andy, thank you so much for appearing on Paul's Security Weekly.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks, guys. It's been
Good
fun.
having you, man. Hey, with that, we're going to take a short commercial break and come back and talk about the security news. Stay tuned.